Hello, and welcome to Chapter 9 for World Geography. And today we're talking about the geography of population. Okay, so, I never get that to work. A couple of things we'll be talking about right here. Let's get right into it. You can read these on your own later. But we've talked about the before, right, that the world is about 7.5 billion people. But when it comes to the distribution, well, it's not evenly spread. First of all, people are still living on land. Now, there are people who are on boats, but they don't live there permanently. So we see this right here. This map shows the population by latitude, distance north and south. So the more people there are at this latitude, you can see the line. So the most right here. So right, roughly between, let's just say, maybe 40 degrees north and 30 degrees north, right here. This is the main swath. So more people. So that's all of America, lots of Europe and China and Asia. Most people live there. And why does that talk about it? Well, why does it concentrate on the latitude, the northern mid-latitudes? Well, the northern area because there's more land. There's more land here than there is here. So there's more land in the north. And secondly, mid-latitudes are the areas that are not the deserts and the tropical rainforests, but they're not frozen. So the type of agriculture that we practice in this world, right, of growing crops throughout the year works best in those situations. And then when we look at, say, east and west, right? And so right here we can see that there's a large peak of people living here, and this would be China, right, and Asia and India, and then a large part, this is Europe, and then America. And this shows our concentration in industrial areas, right? So the United States has a huge industrial urban area, Europe, and then Asia. So this kind of shows that, distribution. People are not evenly distributed. So another thing about distribution, we talked about Tobler's law. So for those of you who have forgotten or aren't sure, right, Tobler's law is that all things being equal, all things are related, but nearer things are more related to others. So in other words, with Tobler's law, who you are depends on where you are. So basically, if you live in America, you're an American, right? That's part of it. There are some differences between the populations of countries. So not every person of every country is the same in many ways. And one of those are that larger countries by population tend to have more power. China has the world's largest population. Almost 18.9% of the world's population is China, then India. And India and China are pretty popular nations. A lot of people are shocked to realize that we have the fourth largest population of any country in the world, right? So you look at these countries on here, Indonesia, Brazil, Pakistan, Nigeria, Mexico, Russia, a lot of powerful countries in here, or countries that have a lot of mention. Population gives you that. It gives you some definite advantages. Obviously, if you have more people, you can have larger armies. But it also means if you have more people, you can have a bigger workforce, so you can have more manufacturing. You can have a bigger consumer base if you have a mass consumer economy like we do. So those are some advantages, but what are some disadvantages? Well, less national coherence, right? Think about the United States. We have a large population, but there's a large variation about what it is to be an American. Not only the way you live, but the things that you value and believe. And that leads to a lot of, right, we have a lot of strife in this country, right? Some countries it goes even further. Like, for instance, in India right now, there's a big, huge issue with religion. So there's a large number, most of India is Hindu, but there's a very large amount of people who are Muslim. And so within that, there are some strife and some divisions going on. In China, the world's largest country by population, so you could say legally, if someone is a Chinese citizen, they are Chinese, but ethnically, the people that run China, that when you think of someone who is Chinese, that's the ethnic group, they call them the Han Chinese, and they are the people that live on the eastern half of the country. The western half of China, people actually are not ethnically Chinese. They're Chinese citizens because they live in the country of China, but they are a different ethnic group. They are a Turkic group called the Uyghurs. They speak a language that is closer to Turkish than Chinese. They're Muslim, and there's a lot of strife going on there. In fact, parts of that area are under martial law. So with larger countries, you have that possibility of just being a more complex country to govern. So smaller countries have that benefit too, that they may be more homogenous, a smaller population. So, for instance, you know, Jamaica, everyone is Jamaican. You have less of that, but you have more vulnerability. And so, use that example of Jamaica is that they may be all Jamaican with less minorities present. They're all the one ethnic group. But if a hurricane comes through and kills 200 people, that's a much bigger hit to a population of 2 million than us at 300 million. So you are more vulnerable. This pandemic's a great example of that too. When it comes to population and where they live, it often runs counter to national imageries or imaginations. So how do we view ourselves in this country? So I'll talk about the idea of the heartland of America. When you watch commercials for, the American heartland, the American way of life, when they try to appeal to that middle ground, right? Do they show kind of, areas where there's wide open space, people are driving pickup trucks and playing football, and maybe they're drinking beer? This idea of the American West, right? The heartland of America. But if you look at where people actually live, in the United States, more people live in the big cities like Chicago and New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco and Miami than actually live in the middle of the country. The part they talk about, the nation's heartland, right? These small towns are very small. Let's put it this way, the 5 largest counties in the United States, which would be New York City, Los Angeles County, Cook County where Chicago is, and the counties that have Dallas and Houston in them, more people live in those 5 counties combined than the rest of the country. I mean, that's the difference. There are more people who live in the city of Chicago than the rest of the state of Illinois. So in reality, you think about Illinois as this Midwestern state, but the population would say, no, we're actually a very highly urban state. And so that sometimes has a difference. The reality is that we are an urban state, but the political representation means that we're rural. So a good example would be the way that we elect senators and congressmen in this country. Okay? So what does that mean? And other countries have it too. So you look at the way we elect. In the United States, right, in our Congress, every state gets congressmen, representatives based on population. The more people, the more congressmen. But you also get 2 senators for every state. So if you take the 5 largest states, which would by population, that's California, Texas, Florida, I think it's Illinois and New York, 5 largest states, 119 million people, which is almost 40% of the entire population of the country. They get 10 senators, 2 for 5 states, 10 senators. Look at the 5 smallest states by population. So that would probably be Alaska, Hawaii, Rhode Island, maybe Montana, Wyoming. But anyway, the 5 small states only have 3.5 million, only 1% of the population, but they still get 10 senators, don't they? So think of that these people have less senators than these people do per person because of the way the laws are written. And why is that important? Well, what is one of the things the Senate does? When people think the president needs to be kicked out of office and they have a trial to impeach him or remove him, it is the Senate that votes. That's a very important job. All Supreme Court justices that make very important decisions on our laws are selected by the president, but the Senate has to approve it. So these 5 smallest states are much more rural, obviously, than these urban states. And so this idea of what it is to be an American and the American heartland, this comes into conflict quite often. These areas have a far greater influence in the national discussion than they would otherwise. Okay? Now, with politics, or with populations, just like with economic activities, people move. So some areas have more, some have less. And this is cumulative causation, just like with economics last chapter. This means that people move to areas of greater economic activity. Conversely, they leave areas of less opportunity. So for the last 5 or 6 years, Illinois has been losing people. More people are moving out of Illinois and Chicago than are moving here. And one of the reasons is the job market has been so bad. The taxes have been out of line. There's been a lot of political unrest for the last couple years. Before this previous governor, we didn't have state budgets. They were going to shut down schools. Other states were having economic growth. and people were leaving and moving. So just like with the economic activity, right? The areas that are gaining that labor, they gain demand, they get growth. And in our country, with people, you get more political power because the more people you have, the more congressmen you get, where some areas feel the drain. Um, there are areas of Maine on the East Coast where if you move there after college, the government will help pay off your student loans. If you move there and live there for say 3 or 4 years, they'll help you pay your student loans. And you have to think, why would they do that? Because right now, a lot of young people in Maine, when they graduate, move away for college and don't come back. They move to the big city. And so this is kind of the way of offering the reward, come here. Okay? So a lot of policies do that. So it's the same kind of idea. You have an area that's growing. People are moving in. They're migrating in. The population grows. As the population grows, so does the economy because people need to buy. They need to eat. And so that creates more demand. And more demand, if there's more people who are eating food and buying cars and shopping, then you need to have more people working in the grocery stores and the gas stations. So you need more employment. And that employment brings more people in. So it kind of grows. It's cumulative. At the same time people are moving here, they're moving out of areas like this. And if population declines, what happens? So I'll use the example of Gary, Indiana. Right? Gary, Indiana, if you have never been there, it's not too far from Chicago, was a very large city. But in the 1960s, major steel mills closed. They moved overseas, and now half the town had no work. People had no jobs. So what did they do? Well, they moved to where there was work, but there wasn't any in Gary, so people were leaving. So the city was losing population. It was shrinking. Well, one of the ways that cities pay for the services, how do they pay for the police in Chicago, is taxes. If there's less people, there's less demand for goods and services. So businesses shrink. If a neighborhood had 50 people and now it's got 5, they're not going to need more stores. They're going to need less. So the stores shrink. People buy less. There's less sales tax collected. Also, if people move, they no longer pay property tax. So there's less tax. And so the government starts to lose money and it shrinks. And you have these issues now where in Gary, Indiana, there are some blocks where every house is empty. And the problem is the city still has to patrol that with police. They still have to have a fire department in case a fire breaks out, but they have less people paying for it. And these are huge issues. We're going to pause that right here, and then we're going to come back and actually talk about what does it actually mean to be in a population.